Hello BookTube, we are about to dive into a review that I have had pending for quite some time. And the reason that it's taken so long since my initial read of this book to actually make the review is I've had to think about it. This is one of those books that has been really unlike anything that I've read in so long that I had to really think through what I was going to say to convey how I felt about this book and what thoughts I left after reading it. And that is Ninefox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee. This has won, I believe, the Hugo and Nebula Award, or it's been nominated. I read this book quite some time ago, but I'm just now feel comfortable enough to actually go forward with the review. This book follows Captain Kell, Cheris, and she is tasked with defeating a uprising, a revolt against the current governmental society, and that's something we're going to come back to in a minute. And the calendar system and the origami military-based tactics and the different factions. And the first thing that I want to mention is exactly that. She is part of the Kell. And this is something that I'm getting a little tired of, this future society in which everyone is stratified very stringently on one attribute that they might have. And the reason I think this is a touchy subject for me personally is just because I work in science, I'm a scientist, and most people think that if you have that background and you think very analytically, that excludes you from ever being creative. And that's not the case. And so the idea of a future society where being good at math means you are definitely this particular group and you can't have any other sort of facets to who you are really goes against basically everything I believe. And that makes you think that I would hate this book. And it took me a few tries to get into. We follow her as she's trying to put down this uprising, and to do so, she has been given the opportunity to work with, in an unknown manner, a particular agent that has been gifted or sentenced to, depending on how you look at it, immortality. And this person's is, I think you say his name, Jido. And that's how I say it in my head when I read it. But he is known for a very horrible act that happened while he was still alive. And he was sentenced to the Black Cradle, which gives him immortality. And exactly how that works, we don't know, and we find out within the novel. The next thing that I want to kind of address with this book is I read a lot of science fiction. Anyone who has been watching me and we've been chatting about books for a while knows that I read a lot of science fiction and a lot of nonfiction that is science related. And this book read more like a fantasy novel than it did traditional science fiction, and was actually quite refreshing in that respect. The passages were written in a very beautiful way. The way they describe the formations and the swarms and the names of things, it really was almost beautiful the way that it was described, and that is something that I have really enjoyed about the series in general. Is the writing style is something that I'm just not really used to for science fiction. I also really like the idea of sentient robots that are part of the society but also apart from it. The servitors, they added a new element that our protagonist, her particular interactions with them, gain something to the story that is different than her fellow people. I also really liked that her character was multifaceted, that she had all of these conflicting emotions that come out throughout the book about what she has to do in order to win, what she has to do to protect the realm and the empire as it stands now, the larger question of ethics as to when you should and shouldn't do that. This book addresses so many things that are great concepts and just ideas that should be put out into books. Like the military, the Kell, are considered expendable. They're crash hawks or death hawks, or they're referred to as disposable, and they know it. They have been imparted with something called formation instinct, and you learn more about this through the book, but it basically robs you of the ability to make a decision. You have such strong imprinting on whoever is command-based, so it's hierarchical. So if someone that is one rank above you gives you a command, you must follow it. But if someone that is 2 ranks above you contradicts that, you follow them. And it takes away the freedom of choice, the valor and bravery, because once you've been imprinted and you're Kell null and they're forward, you don't have a choice anymore. Can have an internal conflict, and it's something that's addressed throughout the book is the idea of the crash hawk, the person who which this formation instinct did not take, and it is their decision to do whatever actions command has given them, and how command does not like that because they don't want them to have the decision, and the corruption that can come when you have absolute control over a body of people and consider them dispendable. I think that aspect could have been explored even more, and I think we get more into that in the second novel in this series. I know a lot of people didn't like this, and it took me, I would say, 3 tries to really get into the book. I started in it's just every science fiction book that I have read starts you off in sort of a blur of jargon, trying to introduce the world and all their particular terminology for technology. This does that in a way that is both calming, and that sort of calmness in the battle sequence that opens the novel, combined with the formations that she's trying to create out of people, and those people are being sent essentially to their death. I don't know, it sort of struck a chord with me. I read a lot of nonfiction about military presence, so space opera, military science fiction, of course, is going to be something that I enjoy, but it still took me a little while to get into. And I think if you're considering reading this book, it's going to be something you either love or you don't understand and you don't like and you don't continue with the series. I really haven't seen any reviews thus far that it fall in that sort of gray zone of, it was okay, I might read the next one. It's the final point of, yes, I love this, oh my god, this was a great concept, and as the world develops, you really, really get into it, or the whole thing about the calendar system and the hexarch and heparch sort of is off-putting to you and is something that is foreign. And that's the next concept that I really want to sort of drive home for my personal thoughts on this system. And I think these are just blank sort of, they call it null when they reach a basal state for any of the systems. So like Kell null means you've been imprinted with formation instinct, but it has not been tested. So there you have no knowledge and there's nothing you can share. And I think that the calendar system for me is the same thing. It is an arbitrary unit of government compared to an arbitrary unit of government, both of which who thinks that they are correct and are trying to outdo and eliminate one another at the cost of humans that they're sort of casting aside. And when I looked at the calendar system in that perspective, it became less sort of distracting to me. And I think the way that this was emphasized throughout the novel is the little cutaways, and this was distracting for a lot of people. I've seen other reviews where people talked about this was boring. I just skipped over them, and I think what it solidifies for me is the idea that the people who are in charge don't care about the system either. The narrator that we have through those passages makes fun of, I don't even know what day it is this the day of the turtle? I mean, how many days do we have to name? Because in order for this sort of construct of military power to work, each day has to have a name. And the character that we're reading through that is part of the heretics, this group that is trying to overthrow the current government and establish their own alternative government, the splinter, is making a point that it is ridiculous, that this is sort of an interchangeable society, and it really just boils down to who wins. And that's the new system. And that's how the current system came about, was through this same sort of bloodbath that is mentioned now. And those are things that I think strengthen the novel. And I know a lot of people found it distracting, as I mentioned, but I really believe that it strengthened the novel overall for me, because it is looking at a government which considers itself always right and is taking away the rights of individuals who have joined. Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts in this book, and I really want to hear your feedback. Now I'm about to discuss something that would be a spoiler. So if you have not finished the book, I recommend that you stop the video now. I will have a review coming for the second book soon, but this will be a spoiler for the first book. So if you were skipping through, stop now. I'm about to discuss a little bit of a spoiler for some of the events that happen in the book. It's not listed in the description, so I don't want to assume that people already know this going in. Okay, so once again, about to discuss a spoiler. Jido being a mass murderer. So this is something that has come up in several reviews, and the fact that he is sentenced more than he is graced with the eternal life that he's been given. And we get to know him through his interaction with Cheris. and you feel for him. And a lot of people have criticized the fact that she sort of forgave the mass murder that occurred, that was the reason that he was put into damnation and eternal life to be used at their basic will for eternity. And it's slowly driving him mad if he wasn't already insane. And that's another component that I really want to talk about. So they talk about his sanity, that he was fine, that he remembers each individual person, because he not only sacrificed the lives of all of his foes, he killed his own military as well. He was the only survivor, the sole survivor of the massacre. And I don't want to minimize the horror of that, but it's alluded through the book, and we find out more in the second book, that it may not be at his own will, and that a government that decides that it should be able to control the individuals who give their lives and not let them make the choice to give their life, where that knowledge and the idea of formation instinct first came from. It mentions actually in the text that where do you think their first test subject was, and what do you think it would do? Because the first groups of people who formation instinct were tried on, it evidently didn't take well, and it had a lot of psychological consequences. And we're left with the final scene of his massacre and him asking what had happened and where was he. And that combined with the idea that formation instinct was probably tried on different people and they were trying to control him, the fact that he was between the sex and different groups did not commingle. So being an assassin or being a Kell, they were not mutually exclusive. And they also talk about the abuse that he had at the hands of the shoes. And I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but I think all these things combine into the fact that they really wanted to kind of get rid of him. And I'm not saying that the character's actions in the murder should be give him a side. I don't think that's the case, but I think that's where we get to Cheris and her forgival, and the fact that she takes the actions that she does at the end of the novel. And I know that's been a big criticism for others, but for me, I don't think he's innocent. I do think he is obviously the cause of millions of deaths, because he's basically a master warrior. He is a general and has never lost a battle. Even when the odds were 8-1 or 5-1, he still won. And that means that you sometimes sacrifice. And I don't want to minimize that, but I also don't think he's 100% at fault. And I'm not 100% sure even now if the actions that he took were his own or if they were commanded. And judging from how this novel ends and the start of the next novel, it leads me more and more to believe that maybe the actions were not his, and we just don't understand the political motivation of his elimination. And we also understand that some of the rulers were very intrigued by him psychologically, and they were insane, and sometimes they do whatever they need to get the toys they want to play with. And we learn more about that aspect in the second book. And having read both books, which is another reason I really wanted to wait on this review, I have a whole new appreciation for Ninefox Gambit and the fact that it is something completely unique and definitely not for everyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. This is one of those books I think I'm going to continue to think about, and I think I want to read when the next book comes out. I want to read all the way through 3 of them back to back to see how that changes how I feel about this book. So you might see follow-up reviews around this same topic. Anyway, I hope you liked this, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Bye.